Chairman of the Soil Conservation and Rivers Control Council, I have pleasure in extending to you a welcome to this screening of films on the vital subject of soil erosion and its control. As you are aware, the Council was set up to administer the Soil Conservation and Rivers Control Act of 1941. The Act enables us to come to grips with the soil erosion and flood problems of this country and develop methods of control to ensure, as far as possible, a permanent system of sound land use. During the past century, our forefathers, by Herculean efforts, converted a wilderness of bush, scrub and swamp into fertile farmlands. Unfortunately, these sweeping changes brought in their train repercussions of a less happy nature. Today, over millions of acres of land, the story of burning, forest denudation, overgrazing and the evils of pests is written indelibly on the landscape. As we live by farming, the protection of the topsoil is of vital importance. To ensure this, pastures and arable land must be carefully managed. To stabilize our farms, we must encourage regeneration of native bush on the steeper, unfarmable areas, or alternatively, plant this land with trees. This will check rapid runoff and prevent deposition of eroded material in river channels and on valuable flats. Once these areas have been brought under control, river works such as stop banks, cuts and bank protection will give permanent control in the lower reaches. On the farming country, equally determined action must be taken to maintain or restore the fertility of the soil by restricted burning, rotational grazing, pasture furrowing, the application of fertilizers, and by many other soil conserving and soil building practices. The Council and the Catchment Boards set up under the Soil Conservation and Rivers Control Act have been democratically constituted to fight on your behalf. We are all affected, directly or indirectly, by soil erosion, which saps the productive capacity of our country. Let us therefore unite on a common front to overcome this threat to our prosperity and, in the extreme, to our very existence. Our mutual interests can be properly served only if all pull their weight and play their part in the fight against soil erosion.
The main conservation problems of the Wairarapa are the farming of hill country, gully control and river protection. Much of the farmland is in high country, with tops bare to wind and rain. In many places, heavy runoff is scouring out the earth. This was once sheep country. In a cloudburst, the whole valley was washed out, and thousands of tons of valuable soil swept down onto flooded areas. Unable to hold floodwaters, scoured riverbanks have added their quota to immense quantities of soil swept out to sea or deposited on the flats. In some cases, banks can be stabilized by closely planted willow cuttings. They work quickly to give a matted growth, protecting the banks from the sweep of the river. Where floodwaters are swifter, more drastic methods of control are needed. Another type of holding bank is made of brush, weighted in position by wire-encased stone sausages. A more difficult method, it's usually carried out under the advice of the Catchment Board engineer. Peculiar habits of rivers and streams often make individual treatment necessary. Here, a shallow man-made cut centers the flow. The groins guide the current and stop the river spreading in its course. Sometimes complete river diversions are necessary to prevent flooding, to reduce the volume of water at certain points, or for better drainage purposes. Under these conditions, river control is too big a job for the individual. It requires large mechanized forces and a community effort. At this point, a diversion is being made to prevent flooding of adjoining low-lying areas. This carryall is building a new stop bank. Later, trees will be planted to give it strength. Resources must be pooled to master the river. In association with the local catchment board, the farmer can achieve protection which is impossible by individual effort alone. Near this point on the Ruamahanga River, a cut has been made, and next time the river floods, most of the water will be diverted through it. But these measures only keep things in check. River control begins on the hilltops, where present grass cover is insufficient to maintain stability. Single trees planted on danger spots help to anchor and bind the earth. While the higher slopes are being stabilized, earth flows in the gullies need controlling. Pole dams planted in key positions are found cheap and effective. Willow cuttings about 10 feet high, planted row after row with wire netting across the bottom, collect and build up debris. Instead of racing down a steep grade, the soil-laden water comes down in steps, depositing its load as it goes. Care must be taken to see there is adequate waterway in flood time, and that banks on either side of the pole dams aren't scoured away. Another Wairarapa problem is to keep hill country in production. Top dressing is considered the best single method of containing a constant sward. The RNZAF have cooperated with the farmer and the Soil Conservation Council in experimental tests of spreading fertilizer from the air. The superphosphate in pellet form spreads quickly and drops to the ground. These experimental runs have shown the spread is satisfactory. 1 year later, pegged-off areas confirm aerial top dressing is a successful method of keeping hill country in production at an economic level. Much of the pioneering work in aerial top dressing is being done in the Wairarapa.
Headquarters of the Southland Catchment Board is in Invercargill, and some of the catchment problems strike near home. Waihope Stream, for example, is apt to flood the suburbs, and Catchment Board members are inspecting its banks. Widening and deepening of the river will not only decrease flooding, it will bring into cultivation some 10,000 acres of swampy land near Invercargill, and so increase carrying capacity of the Waihope's extremely shallow lower valley. Meanwhile, houses are protected from flood by temporary stop banks, here being inspected by delegates to the annual Catchment Board's conference. This year, Southland is host to the conference, and as always, interest is keen. Proceedings are opened by the President of the Catchment Boards Association, Mr. William Machin. Overall policy and mutual problems of the different catchment boards are considered. Proposed measures are debated with enthusiasm by the members. After full discussion, the conference will forward recommendations to the government through the Soil Conservation Council. Soil conservation is a subject of concern to the whole country. Though every district has its own problems, each can learn from the other. The map shows jobs to be done in Southland. Delegates prepare to visit a good lookout point to view the Waimea Plain, namely Glenmuir Hill. Below lies the Waimea Valley, where 20 miles of new river works are to be undertaken to bring much good land into production. Engineering problems of the plan are explained to Catchment Board members from all over New Zealand. series of meanders in the Matara River. One of the first jobs of the Southland Catchment Board was a diversion here to carry the main stream across to the valley's left, where it could be pinned against the base of the hills and kept from removing soil from the valley's heart. Left to itself, the river would keep meandering through the plain, all the time cutting destructively into banks below each curve, destroying land and silting its lower channel. But now, confined within well-built embankments, the river can do no further harm. The overall control of a river valley requires long-term planning. In Southland, this planning is in the hands of an energetic catchment board with enthusiastic staff and members. Account must be taken of the high country from which water and shingle come down, of rivers and their liability to flood, and also of creeks and rivers as a means of draining swampy land. Members of the board and local farmers inspect a cut in the Waimatuku River which has been partly deepened. There are to be 26 miles of such cuts. Where main drainage channels such as this pass through their land, farmers are able to take advantage of them to make lateral ditches and lower the water table in their pastures. Some of the farmers walk over to watch a drag line constructing one of these ditches for local drainage. Water from the ditch falls into the deep cut. This Waimatuku Plain scheme, at a cost of under £1 an acre, will drain 25,000 acres of some of the best land in the British Commonwealth. The scheme is adequately subsidised by the government, with farmers who benefit contributing towards it through the Catchment Board. Here the artificial cut joins the main stream of the Waimatuku River. These cuts are most effective when they go as deep as the underlying gravel. Here is another piece of drainage work, this time near the mouth of the Matara River, where the land is low-lying and where it is not always possible to lower the water table sufficiently to produce good pastures. Such of this land as will make pasture is used for grazing. The rest grows flax. There is 600 acres of it on this property, on land unusable for anything else. Only 8 miles from the river mouth, the flax is sometimes flooded at high tide, but here floods prove beneficial. They drown out pests. The Catchment Board helped the landowner lower the water table for flax growing, and he has 25 miles of channeling. Automatic floodgates keep the tidal river from flowing back into the main cut. Because of the floodgates and deep channels, the occasional floodwaters can now flow to the sea quite rapidly. Thus a use has been found for very low-lying land. Below the floodgates, the cut joins the tidal reaches of the Matara River. This land lies not much above sea level, and the river flows between raised embankments. All this rich soil has not always been here. In course of ages it has been built up by silt brought down by rivers, by natural erosion. A river mouth is the end of a catchment board's problems. The beginning lies in the hills. The Mid-Dome Hills, for example, where Southland Catchment Board has an experimental area. It has accelerated man-made erosion in the hills that causes most trouble in the plains, and the district's farmers show keen interest. Whether they are 80 or 18, they give close study to this steep country, where injudicious burning, followed by overgrazing and by rabbits, has destroyed all useful vegetation. underneath the gravel there is good black soil and one or two healthy grass plants which have managed to escape total destruction by rabbits. It seems to be mainly rabbit pressure that is keeping this slope so barren. Excessive burning of tussock, too heavy grazing and then rabbits have made a blade of grass a sight worth remarking on this one-time sheep run. Attempts are being made to reclaim the slope by planting trees protected by wire netting. Higher up, where damage to vegetation occurred earlier, deep cuts and gullies have developed, sending down gravel to do immense damage in the plains below. Had the land been carefully managed from the start, these gullies need never have developed. The damage could be worse. At least there are a few trees surviving in the hollows, and these are a check to shingle flow. But this is clearly a section of the back country needing to be put in good repair by the elimination of pests, by the sowing and re-establishment of grass, and by the planting of many more trees. With few trees and little grass remaining, the hill surfaces are on the move. To the Catchment Board, such land in its present state is a liability, not an asset. Every heavy rain, the shingle moves down to obliterate good pastures in the Oriti Valley. This shingle has come down from the mid-dome hills. Unless it can be kept in the hills, many more acres down the Oriti River and other valleys will be shingle covered after each heavy rain. Although the ideal place to stop river shingle is up in the hills where it originates, farmers down the river can do a good deal to protect themselves. This is the Dipton stream, tributary of the Oriti, and its channel has been narrowed by willows planted several years ago. Being confined has made it scour its channel deeper. Looking upstream gives an idea of its former spread. Here is another method of control, a shingle bank created exactly where it's wanted by the driving of stakes. When the river rises, the current deposits shingle on the downstream side. Individual farmers can do much work of this kind with the help of the board. Here is a more up-to-date method of making the river itself carry out the work of river control. In this method, logs are wired down horizontally. When the river rises, waterborne shingle is deposited over the log. When it's covered, the farmer moors a fresh log above it. And so the protecting shingle bank builds higher at each flood. To trap shingle in flood time in hollows behind the new banks, brushwood is used, and these alternative beds for the river gradually eliminated. In Southland, as in so many other places, the lower reaches of the rivers present fairly obvious soil conservation jobs to be done, such as tree planting along the banks, clearing beds and raising embankments. This is the Oriti River again, where it has come down from the hills into level land. Where Oriti passes through the Winton Plains, new stop banks are being bulldozed up and will be consolidated with trees. Southland has the biggest stop bank mileage of any New Zealand catchment district. In Southland, the work along the rivers, and even more important, the work in the high country, protects and develops some of the richest farming lands in New Zealand.